Joining us now to tell us more is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hey, well, thanks so much for having me on today.
Now, the PBO report specifically highlights federal government debt, but where is Canada at in terms of our overall public debt?
Well, the federal government is already in more than $1 trillion worth of debt. And the provinces aren't doing well either. When you look at the provinces and the federal government, each Canadian is on the hook on average for about $57,000 in government debt. And really, that's why it's so important for politicians to start taking deficits seriously, to start reining in their bloated budgets. Because you know what? I don't know too many Canadians that have tens of thousands of dollars just lying around to be paying their politicians credit card bills.
Now, during the 2015 election, the PM promised to balance the budget in 2019. So how has the government followed up on this promise?
Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has missed that target by a country mile. We had a big deficit in 2019. We had a big deficit last year. It looks like we're going to have another big deficit this year. And according to the PBO, the federal government isn't going to be able to balance its budget until 2070 under the status quo. That's quite frankly, it's unacceptable, and Canadians deserve better than about 5 decades of deficit spending.
And sir, before we move forward, would you be able to explain for our viewers the difference between balancing the budget and paying down debt?
Yeah, well, when we talk about balancing the budget, we just mean spending less than what you bring in. And, families get that, businesses get that, Canadians get that. We just wish our politicians would get that. And, in addition to balancing the budget, we also have to be worried about the debt. And the PBO says that if we don't balance the budget until 2070, the federal government is going to rack up another $2.7 trillion in debt, which is on top of the already $1 trillion debt tab.
Now, that number doesn't include the interest on top of that. So how much interest has Canada accumulated in its debt so far?
Well, right now, the federal government's interest charges cost us about $20 billion every single year. But if we don't balance that budget until 2070 under the status quo, then we could lose out up to close to $4 trillion in interest charges. And that's really important because that money, it can't go to healthcare. It can't go back into our pockets through lower taxes because that money has to go to the bond fund managers on Bay Street.
Now, considering prior promises to balance the books, how likely is there going to be a balanced budget by 2070?
Well, we need to see a balanced budget long before that, right? That's the PBO's projections, but that doesn't have to come to fruition. We do need to see politicians start to take all these massive deficits. We have to see them take it more seriously, right? And one of the reasons that we need to see politicians address all of this deficits is because if we don't make tough decisions now, we're going to be forced to make even tougher decisions down the road. Let's look back to the 90s, right? Let's look at the province of Saskatchewan. For years, they were kicking their debt problem down the road. And in the 90s, they ended up having to close 50 hospitals in that province. And really, that underscores the point. If we don't make tough choices now, we're going to be forced to make even tougher choices in the future.
All right, sir, just about a minute left. But what steps can the feds take right now to reduce spending and tackle this massive debt?
Well, step number one is they have to reverse course, right? In that most recent federal budget, we saw Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland announce plans to increase permanent federal government spending by more than $100 billion by 2026, with absolutely no plans on how to pay for it. So what we really need to see from our politicians is to start taking deficits seriously, because if they don't, it's going to be average Canadian taxpayers that get hammered with higher taxes.
30 seconds left, sir, but what can Canadians do to voice their concern around this issue?
Well, the key thing that Canadians can do is when we hear these politicians and their massive spending plans, we have to ask a simple but serious question. How are you going to pay for it?
All right, sir. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Well, hey, thank you so much for having me on today.